Hi friends, it's Lisa Hetrick, illustrator for Gina K Designs, and I am so grateful you're here with me today. I'm going to be sharing a tutorial that is big on love and has lots of color. So I've got a few supplies here and I'm going to share things along the way, but these are the two stamp sets that I'm going to be using today. The UR stamp set that was illustrated by me for Gina K Designs, and the new Hearts and Flowers stamp set. I'm a wee bit obsessed with this little love stamp and the companion die cuts that go with this set. So I am going to be playing around with using the die cut image of the heart from the Hearts and Flowers Stamp TV kit and the love stamp. So let's get started. So I have two pieces of watercolor paper here, cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm going to make two backgrounds because I'm not sure which one I'm going to use. So we're just going to play a little bit. And I'm going to use some of the Kuretake Clean Color brushes too. But first, let's start with creating a neutral background. So I'm going to use the Antique Linen Distress Oxide on this watercolor paper to kind of create a very, very neutral background in which I can layer more color on top. So this particular watercolor paper that I'm using is from B paper. It's a really nice layering weight cardstock that works really well for watercolor projects, but you can use any kind of watercolor paper that you might have on hand or whatever your preference is. And in the notes, I will list some of my favorite watercolor papers to work with. So I went ahead and took the Antique Linen Distress Oxide and put some down onto my craft mat and gave it a little spritz of water. And I'm kind of just trying to work with the medium to create a really, really neutral yellow-like background. I went ahead and sped up the video so that you can see me making the second watercolor background using the Antique Linen Distress Oxide ink. Once I got the color onto the watercolor paper and I was happy with it, I just went ahead and just heat set it with my heat tool just to kind of dry it up. So the next step in the process is to start adding a little bit more color on top of the neutral background. So I went ahead and grabbed the Abandoned Coral Distress Oxide ink and added a little bit of water to it and started to take the watercolor paper and sprinkle it and smash it and smoosh it into the color and just get color randomly all over the paper. Once I was okay with the amount of color that I put on the paper, I just kept spritzing the paper and I went ahead and heat set it and just kind of let it dry so that I can see what I was working with. Now, when you do this technique, the paper, when you're finished drying it, the paper gets kind of warped, not only from drying, but because it is watercolor paper. And I wanted to share this little trick that I learned from a video from Jennifer McGuire Inc. So I'll link that up so that you can go take a look. But she came up with this idea that you take your piece of watercolor paper, you put it between a piece of copy paper, and you run it through your die cutter, either your Sizzix die cutter or whatever die cutter you have, and it will help flatten out the cardstock or the watercolor paper or whatever paper you're using that might have gotten a little bit warped from your water mediums. So I went ahead and I ran both pieces of my watercolor paper through to flatten them out, and I am going to move ahead with using this card because I really like the color and it really did flatten out really nicely. So I'm going to take that other piece of background and use it for another project at another time. So now it's time to get started with the stamping, and I'm going to use the wreath from my UR set to begin building all of my other elements around it. I'm going to use the sentiment from the Hearts and Flowers set that says, "You are my heart," because I absolutely love that sentiment. And since I'm going to give this card to my Girly Twirly, she's 14 now, that sentiment is perfect. I'm also going to make a second card for my son who's 16, and I'm going to give him that sentiment as well. So the next step was to go ahead and ink up the wreath image. I used a black VersaFine ink, but you could use any kind of black ink that you want. I just really like the results of this particular ink on watercolor paper. It's crisp, it's clean, and it gives me a lot of really nice contrast with the color. Step was to add a little bit of color using the Zig Clean Color brush pens and a water brush. And first I started to kind of layer the color in right from the tip of the marker, and then I went ahead and applied some of that color down onto my craft mat, lifted it up with my watercolor brush, and just started to color in some of the leaf images around the wreath. And now it was time to take it to the next level because there's so much great color pop and contrast going on in this piece right now. I really wanted to capitalize on that and blow out the whole look of the wreath by adding more of the bits and baubles from the stamp set around the wreath image. I went ahead and sped up the video a little bit so that you could see me using the bits and baubles and pieces from the stamp set to kind of build out and blow out the wreath. So go ahead and take a look. The leaves and the bits and baubles and pieces from the stamp set were intentionally designed to fit around and inside all of the other leaves that are part of the wreath. So when you nest them all together, you can turn the wreath piece in any direction and you can get a different look, and it can be very graphic and very uniform. But most of all, it's kind of playful and it's fun, and you can create something different every single time. So now I'm going to move on to creating the embellishments that are going to layer on top of the wreath. I'm going to start off with using the Passionate Pink ink from Gina K Designs and ink up the love stamp from the Hearts and Flowers stamp set. Here's a picture of the stamp set, and I really dig this stamp set. There's so many elements from it, so versatile, and it comes with an accompanying die set, and it's just perfect. And the heart, you're going to see me use it in a little bit as an embellishment by itself. So you get kind of a twofer out of using the die and the stamps, because you can use the heart-shaped dies alone by themselves, and that's super cool. So I went ahead and inked up the love stamp with the Gina K Designs Passionate Pink ink. I really love that ink. You've seen many of my videos where I'm using this ink, and it's just a really great coverage ink. At this point in the design, I'm still kind of unsure of where I'm going to put the embellishments. I'm just kind of thinking through things. Sometimes we all get ideas in the beginning and we're just not sure where it's going to go, and that's all part of the process. But I absolutely knew that I wanted to use a little tiny piece of hemp twine and kind of make it into a ribbon and put it at the very top of the wreath. Because initially I was thinking that I would hang the embellishments from the top of the wreath and they would kind of be like interactive elements. But at this point, I'm really just kind of exploring, and I just went ahead and cut up the ribbon and got it all set. And another reason why I really like using twine or string and pieces like this for projects like this is because they're very low profile and they don't add a lot of bulk to the project. So if I did want to mail it, it would be pretty easy to do. I just used a little dab of the crystalline drops from Gina K Designs to adhere the piece of hemp twine, and really that's all you need. It's just a little tiny dab and a little touch to hold it down, and it seriously just stays right in place. You can see it's just not even going to pop off. Okay, so now I've moved ahead and I'm really looking at all the different elements that are part of the Hearts and Flowers stamp set. I know I want to use the sentiment that says "You are my heart," and I'm just not really sure where I want to put it. I'm thinking about using it over between the two pieces in the wreath, and then I think about putting it over on the left-hand side where I have the love sentiment. So when I can't figure something out like that and I'm not really sure, I tend to take the stamp right off and just kind of position it around. And after moving it around for a bit, I kind of honed in on the composition of where I wanted to put all of the elements. So I went ahead and started to ink up the You Are My Heart stamp and decided that I was going to position right up underneath the hemp twine. So it looked like it was kind of hanging from the piece of hemp. And that really felt pleasing to me because it felt like a nice embellishment. And I really like the idea of putting the sentiment up underneath the hemp piece of hemp twine. I think it really rounds out the look and feel, and it kind of puts the sentiment just kind of up there and front and center. And I think it's very pleasing to the eye. So the next step was to kind of figure out how to round out the rest of the composition. I knew that the love stamp was going to be perfect over on the left, but I wanted to use the hearts that are in the Hearts and Flowers kit um, over on the right hand side in some way, but I wasn't sure if I was going to straight up stamp them or fussy cut them. So I just went ahead and put a little bit of foam on the back of the love embellishment and pop that on. And I really like how that creates that contrast with the You Have My Heart between the pink and the black color. So instead of using the ink pad for this next step, I went ahead and used the Zig Clean Color brush and colored right onto my stamp. This is the dark pink that I used in the leaves around the wreath. So this kind of pulls some of that color together. It also helps pull some of that color over to the right from the big heart embellishment that's over on the left. And what I really like about stamping with this particular ink is that it gives you that watercolor effect. It's not terribly solid. When you stamp it down, it looks like a piece of watercolor. So these end up looking like watercolor hearts, and I really think that they're just gorgeous. One little word of caution that I want to share: if you don't, it will stain your stamp. So if you use the Zig Clean Color brushes as an ink on your clear stamp, it will stain it. So if that's something that you would prefer not happen, I don't recommend using this step. I would just go ahead and use one of your favorite stamp inks and go ahead and stamp those hearts down right there in between those two wreath pieces. At this point, I'm really loving the way the composition of this piece is coming along. It's very vibrant, it's happy, but I've got a little bit of room in the middle there that feels a little bit like dead space. So I went ahead and die cut myself another heart from the Hearts and Flowers die cut set and decided that I was going to use it as an embellishment that came right off of one of the pieces of the wreath. And I think it's going to be a really nice extension of the wreath and a really nice embellishment at the same time. So I went ahead and grabbed the Distress ink, the Twisted Citron, which is like one of my favorite greens, and it's really going to give it a lot of pop. So I just inked it up, put that ink right down on my craft mat, added a little water, and just smashed that embellishment right into the ink to get it all nice and juicy. What I really love about this color is that it's kind of lime greeny and it's a very yellow green look. So depending upon how much of the ink that you layer on it, you can get different effects. At this point in the design, I went ahead and put the embellishment down in that negative space, but it really felt like it still needed something because the color alone wasn't going to hold together the whole design. So I went back to the UR stamp set and took a look at all of the different lines and different kinds of components of the stamps and thought I could use bits and bobbles and pieces to kind of add a little texture to the embellishment. But instead of using a whole stamp, I knew that I wanted to move ahead and use a part of the stamp to create kind of a pattern. So I pulled the floral from the UR stamp set, inked it up in the black, and went ahead and stamped it right down in the middle of that embellishment. So the whole flower wasn't going to show up in the heart space, but part of the design, specifically the center part of the design, shows up in the heart and kind of gives it a different pattern and a different texture for the embellishment. So now that the embellishment is done, I really like that pattern that's in the heart. I go ahead and put it back into the composition of the design, and I really think it helps hold the piece together now because all of the black from the outer edges are really kind of being brought back into the center where the sentiment is and where the heart is. But I think it needs a little bit more, so I moved back to looking at the bits and baubles on the stamp set and figuring out how it can create some kind of natural leaves and pieces that look like they're coming out of the heart. So with the heart in position and kind of nested off of that tiny piece that's coming off of the bottom of the wreath, I just left it there for position while I was stamping and figuring out where I wanted to put the other elements to kind of tie the heart together into the center of the design. And I really like how this one element just kind of wraps around the T of the heart. And the whole thing, just using the stamps and the embellishment, kind of help hold it all together. Just put a few pieces of foam dots on the back of the embellishment and popped it right into position and lined it up really nicely with those two stamped images. So now I wanted to we have a lot of pink going on this design. So I wanted to kind of pull together that yellow green from the Twisted Citron Distress ink. So just went ahead and used the 3 dots from the stamp set and inked it up with the Twisted Citron and just went ahead and stamped it in just a couple different places around the wreath, and I actually stamped it in 5 different places to kind of draw that color that's in the center of the wreath out a little bit to the outer part of the wreath and just kind of create a little bit more composition with the color so that it all looks like it's coordinating together. At this point in the design, I was feeling really good about the composition and the look and the feel and all of the colors. But I started to look at the outer edges of the design and I really wanted to add back in some more vibrant pinks. So I took the Distress Oxide ink, the Picked Raspberry, which is like one of my favorite inks, and mashed it down onto the craft mat, added some water, and just picked up the design and started to, with a paintbrush, just mix up that ink and started to add a little bit more color around the edges. Now it's time to move ahead and put the finishing touches on the card. So I went ahead and cut myself a piece of the black onyx cardstock from Gina K Designs. And the reason why I love using this black cardstock is because I tend to use black ink a lot in my compositions and my stamping, and I really think it creates a nice contrast, and it also helps all of the other colors on the design pop. So I went ahead and just added a little bit of tape to the back, making sure I got every bit around the corners. Because it is watercolor paper, you need a little bit extra to just kind of make sure it stays on really nicely on the cardstock. So since this card is going to be a 1-layer card and it is black, I needed a really, really good white ink to be able to write on the back of it. Now, my favorite white ink pen is the Uniball Signo pen. I believe it to be the unicorn of white pens. So here's what the final project looks like, and I really love the way it turned out. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and thanks so much for watching.